Okay, welcome everybody to the Rhinebeck Historical Society monthly program. I'm David Miller, and I'm here today to talk about the Schultz family of Rhinebeck. 2 years ago, Mike and I had a visit from James Schultz, the 9th generation descendant from Christian Otto Schultz, who lives down in Maryland. He came up to do some research on the history of the Schultz family, especially his line, and he brought with him 2 albums consisting of 325 pages of maps, photographs, genealogy charts, and we asked him if we could borrow them and scan them. And I spent the summer of 2017 scanning the 325 pages. They're up on the web, and I'm going to tell you at the end how to find them. And James was great. He came back in the fall, took us out to dinner during Sinterklaas, and we gave him a DVD with all the album scans on it, and he was very happy. So tonight I'm going to talk about the one thin line of Schultz's from Christian Otto down to James. And the album has, the beginning of the album shows the 9 Schultzes that are in his line. Christian Otto had 11 children, and one of them was Peter Schultz, Captain Luke, Captain Benjamin, Captain Walter, and Captain Benjamin F. Schultz II. They were all captains on the river. They were all the beginnings of ferry and transportation to New York City, and very important to what happened in America in the 1800s and 1700s actually too. So he had 9 children, and in the album it shows the 9 children: Anna, Abraham, Isaac, Christopher, Margaret, Christian, Frederick, Peter, the one we're going to talk about tonight, William and Jacob, who were twins, and John, the last one. And 6 of them, including Christian Otto, were Revolutionary War veterans. And I'm going to talk a little bit about Frederick, because his son founded Schultzville, a little bit about Jacob, because it's going to tell you what life was like in Rhinebeck in the 1800s. And so let's start. Christian Otto Schultz was born in 1712 in Bredenfield, Germany. He immigrated to America and got to Philadelphia September 23rd, 1734. And he went to Wading River, New Jersey, because the Sharpensteins, who were from the town in Germany he came from, had a farm there, and he went to work with them. Would be that their sister, Christina, who was from Rhinebeck, came to visit her relatives at the farm in Wading River, fell in love, got married, moved back to Rhinebeck, had 11 kids. And so that's how Christian Otto comes to Rhinebeck and how the whole Schultz generation up here gets started. And the rumor was that he rented and then bought 100 acres of land from Colonel Beekman in Colonel Beekman's house, which is the Kip Beekman Hermance house on River Road, which we own the ruins of. The Historical Society owns that property. And it says in there, he rented first 100 acres of land for 1 shekel of wheat a year, and a shekel's about a quart of wheat. And then eventually he bought the land. And the album has a map that shows the farm. It was up here on Old Post Road, just before 9G, just before 9G today, and it was 100 acres on the west side of Old Post Road. And the album just had a little bit about him, that because of his excellent penmanship, he taught school in Rhinebeck, and many of the early wills and were written or witnessed by him in Dutchess County, because he was a very literate person. And here's a little bit about Christian Otto from the album. When his sons returned from Rhinebeck to the Revolutionary War, they married and settled on their own farms. Christian Otto, upon his death, left the farm to his favorite great-granddaughter, Helen Ursula Schultz, who married Walter Livingston Tenbrook, son of General Leonard Tenbrook. And the Tenbrook farm is also on Old Post Road. It's 150 acres on the east side of Old Post Road. So after the marriage, the farm was 100 acres here and 150 acres here, comprising this whole section of Old Post Road. Now, Benjamin Schultz III, who is the grandfather of James, who brought us the albums, is the one who made this album. And he comments, he's BFS III, and he says, standing in the middle of the road, the opposite post looking north, So you are looking towards 9G. Again, the Schultz farm was on the left, the Tenbrook farm was on the right. After the marriage, the 250 acres belonged to Tenbrook. And we'll talk a little bit about Jacob Schultz, who was not Peter, but Peter's brother. And he was in the Continental Army. And just to give you an idea of what it was like in the 1800s, after the Battle of Lexington, April 19th, 1775, 100 people signed a pledge repudiating Great Britain. Jacob Schultz of Rhinebeck was the first to sign. So Jacob, these were important people. Peter and Jacob and his father were all in the army. And another thing was, someone gave Mike some 3 blacksmith albums that they had salvaged from the garbage from the late 1700s and early 1800s, and I scanned them as well this year. And in one page of them, well, Jacob is mentioned many times. Here's Rhinebeck, June 10th, 1792, Jacob Schultz, and it said, making a new coulter of his own iron, and then fixing mandolins to his chimney. So the problem was, when Mike and I were reading the thing, is they weren't all as educated as Christianato, so they wrote as it sounded. So further down the page it says, fix 2 old shoes on a horse, and it's OLTSHUES. So our best guess about this is fixing mandolins, to his chimney, medallions to his chimney. People used to have those stars on their chimney. And I said, so what is a coulter? And obviously, if you bought your own iron, it was a lot cheaper than paying the blacksmith for his iron. So I looked up what a coulter is, and it appears to be it's an iron knife that is mounted on the front of the plow and breaks up the clods and makes it easier for you to plow the soil. And Jacob was one more thing before we get back to Peter. We had a talk last year by Dutchess County historian Will Tatum, who talked about ancient documents. And one of the ancient documents talked about a girl in Rhinebeck who got pregnant, and the overseers of the poor investigated the incident. What they were, and what Jacob was they were asked to interview every incident that happened of this kind in all the towns, especially in Rhinebeck, and make sure that they would track down the father and someone would be responsible, not the town, for this mother and the baby. So here's another incident of that involving Jacob, and that is, he was an overseer of the poor. Those names hereunto described, overseers of the poor, are applied to examine the age and ability of a female slave, Lydia, owned by Henry Livingston. You could not emancipate somebody unless, again, Lydia was young enough and had skills enough that she could earn a living and support herself. And so they say she's under the age of 45, sufficient ability, given the hands of the town of Rhinebeck, and 21st day of September 1818, Jacob Schultz, Gerrit van Weerdena, say it's okay to emancipate her. And then there's the paper from Henry Livingston. I certify that whom it may concern, this instrument, with the consent of the poor masters of this town, I do emancipate my Negro woman slave Lydia, Liddy, or Lil, and discharge her from all further service. So Jacob, did a lot of things, and this is just a little flavor of what it was like around 1800 in Rhinebeck. But let's get back to the main Schultz family. And here's the veterans. It starts with Abraham, who was the first lieutenant in the Minutemen. Peter, who's the person we're going to talk about. He's in our line. He was the first lieutenant. William and Jacob, the twins, were sergeant and a private. John was a sergeant major, and of course Christian was a major because he was the patriarch of the family. And they were all veterans of the war, and many of them are buried in the Reformed Church Cemetery. And they were very involved in the cemetery, and here is a sample Christianato, in memory of Christianato Schultz, who departed this life November 5th, 1785, in the 74th year of his age. That's quite old for that time to live to be 75. So they were also very involved in the church. They were elders, they were deacons. There's Jacob and Frederick were elders. Deacons were Peter, Jacob, and a Richard Schultz, who I think was one of their sons, because it was 1844, quite a bit later.
What church? I missed the name.
The Dutch Reformed Church. And as I said, most of the veterans are buried. I believe there's 25 Revolutionary War veterans buried in the churchyard and one British soldier. And so 6 of them are, and their wives, are all buried in the cemetery. You can go see the graves if you want to take a walk over there. So we move on to Peter. And here's a brief biography of Peter, 1757 to 1832. And this is again from the album, second generation. He was born in 1750, as I said, 1757, and he was buried in the Reformed Cemetery. He had 12 children, as I said. He served as a first lieutenant in the 6th Regiment, Charlotte Precinct, Dutchess County, in the American Revolution. His regiment was commissioned in February 1775. He was wounded in the leg with a bayonet, returned to service with Colonel Livingston, who after the war gave him a life lease on his farm in Württemberg, now part of Rhinebeck, and 2 slaves. The farm is now owned by the Cozine family, and I'm going to tell you about that. We know very little about Peter, but he was the beginning of the generations of Schultzes that were on the river. And I'm going to talk about Peter first. Here's a picture of, a map of where the house was. Christian Otto, and then the Ten Brook Farm was up here. Peter's house was down here at the edge of the village. When you're coming north into Rhinebeck, if you make a right turn onto Mill and go around to come into the village, right behind Stephen Melly's law office is where Peter Schultz's house and farm was. And it's still standing. You can see on that map the house. That's the house as it was in the 40s. And it's still there today. I went out a couple of weeks ago and took a picture, and it looks pretty much the same as it did. The 2 bay windows, the porch, and it's still there, which is great. And a lot of these houses are still standing. Now, so it's right there. So his son, Captain Luke, who we're going to talk a lot about tonight, was the 3rd generation of the family. He lived from 1772 to 1825. And here's a picture of Luke's house on River Road, somewhere south towards Ellerslie. And Mike and I have no idea where it is. I think it must have been torn down. This is a picture taken either by Benjamin III or by some picture that he came across, an old picture of the family. So we don't know exactly where it is, but it was south of town. And here's a map roughly of where it was. And again, Peter was number 2. He's number 3 down here towards Ellerslie. And right here, number 4, his son, was up next to the train station. And we'll talk about him in a minute. So here's a comment of how this all began with the river traffic. Here's a comment from Benjamin. And he said, all transportation during the period 1705 to 1785 was by means of horseback, oxen, horse-drawn carriage, Conestoga wagon. The Albany Post Road, or King's Highway, was a rutted road and through miles of open territory. And actually, it wasn't a very good way to transport stuff. And there was a lot of problems when you were Christian Otto or Jacob or Peter and you wanted to get your farm goods or other goods that you made down to the city before they perished. Getting them by wagon train all the way down to New York City, an old rutted road, wasn't a good idea. So, Luke had a great idea. How about taking them down by boat? And so here's the page of a dock. It was Mills Point, Schultz's Landing. It's south of where the bridge is today. It's abandoned now, but here's a little bit about it from the album. Benjamin found this in a book called Hudson River Travel at the New York Public Library. I couldn't find it anywhere. It must be long lost in the past 80 years. But he talks about business was brisk from the earliest days. Water power was the first requisite, and a dock on the river was next. Rhinebeck was founded because of the 14 mills along Landsman's Kill, led to the industry here in the beginning in the 1700s. Rhinebeck soon possessed all of these, and Captain Luke, he remembered his father, Lieutenant Peter Schultz, and his grandfather, Christian Otto, and their large farms and the troubles they had getting their produce to market. He saved his money and bought a sloop large enough to carry passengers and cargo on the river. And here's another quote from the album, Luke Schultz, Rutgers Dock, Mills Point, Schultz's Landing, they're all the same place, just south of where the bridge is today. He improved it. He built a storehouse, a smithy, a tavern on the same. He ran a sloop carrying passengers, freight, up and down and across the river. He ran the first Hudson River service from Rhinebeck to the Co-Entes Slip in New York City, and I'll tell you what that is in a minute. So here is a map, a piece of the 1798 map. We have 4 of them in different possessions around the area. This is one of them, and here's the road coming down, and it says Schultz's Landing. This is 1798. So they recognize that that's where the dock was. And you can see it on another one of Benjamin's maps. It shows you came past the farms, you went up Lower Hook Road, and there was a road that went right down to Mills Point before this railroad was built. Now I wanted to get a picture of that. I said, how can I get a picture of Mills Point today? Mike said if it got warm enough, he'd be out on his kayak and he'd try to take a picture, but it hasn't been warm enough for me. Actually, Alice Benson said yesterday she might take a hike down there and try to find it without getting hit by a train, getting down along the train tracks.
I couldn't find it though.
She couldn't find it. I thought of, well, coming back from Kingston shopping, I could pull, onto the shoulder of the bridge, jump out, take a quick picture, jump back in the car before the cameras that watch for suicides set off the police coming to stop me from jumping. So then I remembered we have Google Earth, and I didn't need to do that to risk my life or Mike's life, because here's the bridge, here's Mills Point today, and of course it's now a driveway, and it doesn't make it there anymore. It comes out here to someone's house. That's his driveway down here, and you can't get through the jungle to get there. You have to cross the train tracks anyway. So it was a good, attempt. At least I got you the picture so you could see where it is. And here's Howard Morse wrote a book, 1908, Howard Morse, and it was History of Rhinebeck. And here's a sketch from it. I have a couple of quotes from it. Mills Dock, dwelling, etc. The view is as it was between 1805 and 1836. It is his sloop and some houses. There was a blacksmith shop, a little place to stay, and it's where you would bring cargo from the city and take cargo and passengers to the city. So one of the things that Captain Luke carried was slate down to New York City from Slate Dock for the houses of the city, for the roofs of that. And so I got a lot of help from Craig Marshall, president of the Clinton Historical Society. I want to talk just for a minute about where the slate came from. And it came from one of Cristiano's sons, Frederick, whose son John F. Schultz was the founder of Schultzville. So here's something from the Morse book, which says, this is 1908, he wrote this. Schultz Mills Dock was one at the time the busiest dock in town. It was reached from the road starting at Kings Highway north of Walter Ten Brook's farm, which we know where that is, and is now running in what's now known as Barrystown or Inside Road. We know it as River Road. On the corner of Kings Highway was a store kept by Skirmerhorn, afterwards by Henry Schott. Above it was a tavern. They are known as Bacchus Smith or Moole's Tavern. Now the residents of James Way. Now Way's Tavern was where the mobile station is at the intersection of 9 and 9G. And the tavern is still there. It's a house. We did it in another talk that we gave last year, that you can see the house. It looks just like it was. I should have put you a slide of it. And it was where the Palatines were. It was where Rhinebeck began. And it served as town hall, the blacksmith shop, a storehouse. Everything happened at Way's Corner before they moved down to the Rhinebeck Village and Rhinebeck Flats. And Slate Quarry was opened in Schultzville. The first shipping point for slate was Schultz's Landing. So Christian Otto had a son named Frederick, and his son, John F. Schultz, was born in 1772 and was the founder of Schultzville. And he purchased 220 acres of land. His land was well-watered, limestone tract situated somewhat north of the center of the town of Clinton. Shortly after 1807, Mr. Schultz erected a substantial farmhouse, a grist mill, and nearby stream a dam and a good-sized pond remained until the early 1900s. Sometime later, the general store was built, houses sprang up, making it a small village, a blacksmith shop, which remained in operation for many years, at various times a harness shop, a cigar making shop, and other small industries. And Craig Marshall from Clinton sent me this picture from house built in 1807. The picture was from, I think, 1910. And you can see the house, and it has a lower porch there, and a side building, and a porch in the front. And Craig Marshall took a ride out there and sent me a picture of it as today. And it looks just like it did, except they seem to have added 5 windows to the top to get a little more light on the second floor. But again, it's great that we still have these buildings existing 200 years later. And if you're not sure where Schultzville is, somebody asked me, where is Schultzville? I have a little map here. Here we are in the village of Rhinebeck. And if you go down 9G along Slate Quarry Road and come down here, here's Schultzville and Schultz's Mountain in the town of Clinton, which is where it is. I mean, Schultz was in the middle of the town of Clinton. And from his various enterprises, John F. Schultz acquired a fortune, this is like early 1800, of $100,000, which made this guy a billionaire, because that was a heck of a lot of money in 1810. He was also part owner and captain of another sloop called the Farmer, and in 1807, for 10 months, he was the captain of the Farmer. And so to give you a feel for what went out of Schultz's landing, it listed sundries, pigs, rice, flour, apples, cider lard, and then passage for some sons, passage and board for other people, and chest of good and Muslims and other stuff, so candles. So the goods and the wares of the farmers and the people who made things and manufactured things was sent to where the money was, New York City, on the sloop. And in this time was the farmer's sloop, not Luke Schultz's sloop. And the Farmer, I don't have a picture of it, but I found a picture of an early 1800 Hudson River sloop, if everyone's finished looking at all that. We have big journals of that. I'm not sure who did them. We have like 4 of them in there, including the one that Craig Marshall sent me this picture of, that list the contents of what was shipped up and down the river. The logs from the captains have been translated and recorded. And it probably looks like this. It had 2 or 3 sails. In the back was a little cabin for the passengers. The front was where the cargo was loaded. And they sailed up and down the river, buying and selling stuff as they went. Another page from Morse talks about it. The Slate Quarry. The enterprise identified with the early history of Rhinebeck was the Slate Quarry, upper end of Schultz Mountain over the town line in Clinton. The mountain was 780 feet high of slate. Prior to 1800, the quarry was opened and worked with profit. The slate was used principally for roofing in New York City. The slate was carried from the quarry by ox teams, first to Schultz Mills Dock and later Slate Dock, which took the name from this fact and sent the sloops to the city. And of course they carried it on Slate Quarry Road from Schultz's Mountain to here. And there's one last thing from the history of Clinton that says the extensive deposits on Schultz Mountain, a short distance west of Schultzville, have at different times afforded considerable industry activity. In 1798, slate was quarried here for roofing of the home of Mrs. Richard Montgomery in Rhinebeck. The Hudson River Slate Company was the first to operate the quarries, which covered 293 acres. The manufactured slate was hauled by oxen to Slate Docks in Rhinecliff. The beginning of this business was so successful, it was valued at $1 million. There were many buildings on the property to house the workers. Gravestones of a child of one of the workers are still visible on the premises. By 1874, the good slate was exhausted, shipping costs became prohibitive, and the first company went out of business. Another company tried to reopen it. The quarries had also failed, and now we have the town dump. So much, things
Which is
come.
closed. It's been closed.
And it's been closed for a while, I'm sure. So let's get back to Captain Luke, our guy, the 3rd generation from Cristianato. He worked out of New York City, bringing his goods for transportation to and from Europe up the Hudson River. And so Coenties slip warehouse, Captain Luke would then board the sloop carrying his items up the Hudson, shipping to many points along the way. And so they would take manufactured goods that would come from England or come from other parts of the country, things that they didn't have upstate New York, machinery and stuff, and they would bring that up to the farmers and residents of the Hudson Valley from New York City to Albany, as after they delivered the farm goods and the other candles and the stuff that was manufactured up here down to the city. And here's another sketch from the album. Again, picture of the sloop, a mast, 2 sails, a mainsail, a foresail, cabin in the rear, cargo hatch in the front. So everyone pretty much has the same picture of what a Hudson River sloop looked like in the early 1800s. And here's another little page from the album. Among the early sloop captains, familiar names are Bogardus, Kip, DeWitt, Prague, Russa, Statz, Elmendorf, and Schultz. The Coenties slip was the destination of these captains. The dock at Coenties slip was the cornerstone of the commerce in the city of New York. Sloops gathered the grain, lumber, pelts along the banks and brought it back from New York City, hardware, farm equipment, bricks. Valentine in his history mentions that the sloops were sought by New York City merchants to deliver their goods upstate. So, Coenties Dock, what was that? I'll tell you a little about Coenties Dock. It's a strange name, Coenties. And here's a thing from Morse. He talks about Coenties. It was the starting point of it's 40 miles of piers. It was built by the Dutch West India Company, whose quaint, round-bottom, high-pooped vessels first used it. The Hudson River sloop and open boats gathered grain, lumber, pelts, herbs, produce along the riverbank, carried them to the marketplace. They brought back hardware, groceries, household goods, brick, farm implements, occasional cow calves, and ewe milk sheep to the farm. They moved slowly. The methods were primitive, but they laid the enduring foundation for the success, as always, it's supply and demand. So where was Coenties Dock? It was basically where the South Street Seaport is today. It was from Pearl, Water, South Street was where the dock was. And I found in the New York Public Library a picture of Coenties Dock around 1800. You can see the Dutch, the Dutch influence on the houses and the little sloops parked here. Now, the second picture I found, apparently, sort of like Mrs. O'Leary's cow, in 1865, one of the warehouses caught fire and burned down a quarter of New York City. And here's a picture of that. The Great Conflagration of December 16th and 17th, 1835, from Coenties Slip. So this, it burned down a quarter of the city, and obviously did a lot to affect the merchants and all of our guys that were bringing stuff down there. So I found that in the public library. Now, when the railroad was built in 1865, access to the Mills Point dock was closed off, and the dock was abandoned. And as you saw in that map, Google map, you can't get there anymore. Alice couldn't get her way there either. So that brings us to the fourth in line of Schultz, another captain, Captain Luke. Captain Luke had 3 sons, Benjamin, Alexander, and Peter F. Schultz. Each of the sons went to sea when they were 13 or 14, and they returned with master's papers years later. Each of them followed the river from which they came, and each of them helped greatly with the building of the port of New York City. Now, Benjamin the First, we remember our author is Benjamin III, lived in Rhinecliff. Here's a picture of him on his 50th wedding anniversary, and he lived, here we are again, remember, Peter was number 2, Luke was number 3, Benjamin is number 4, right next to the train station. And it so happens that, here's a picture from the album, which is kind of a little blurry, but you can see the front of the house, the side of the house, it has a little porch. And a good friend of the Historical Society who has spoken here and written articles, Jack Conklin, owns this building, and he sent me pictures of it as it is today. And once again, we have a Schultz house that's still there. It seems in the picture on the left, you've lost the front porch, but on the right side, it looks the same. It's on Dutchess Terrace. If you're standing at the train station waiting for a train and you look up, you see the houses up there. It's one of the houses. It was actually where the train station was, and when they built the train station, then they moved these houses south to get them out of the way at the train station. So that is Benjamin's house. Now, he was very involved in the Methodist Episcopal Church in Rhinecliff, and here's a picture of it, a postcard of the Methodist Church in Rhinecliff. And here's a very nice thing about Benjamin. When the church was having Captain Luke Schultz gave them the organ. Years later, on his golden wedding anniversary, we saw his picture on the 50th anniversary, they gave him a cane, a gold-headed cane marked from MEC, Methodist Episcopal Church, to Benjamin F. Schultz. And Benjamin Schultz III says, I have this cane in my possession. I have to find out from James next time we talk to him if he actually has the cane. I'd love to have a picture of that. So Benjamin captained many ferries that ran from Rhinebeck to Kingston Point. Several ferries, including the Lark and the Rhine. I don't have a picture of those, but from our archives, I have a picture of the ferry boat transport. And that's what it looked like. It went from the Rhinecliff dock to Kingston Point, carried passengers. That's one picture of it. Here's another picture of it docked at Kingston Point. Here's another, I think there's a postcard of it, the transport, the Rhinecliff and Kingston ferry. This was way before the bridge was built. The only way to get across the river. Some people said that they know their relatives walked when it was really cold winters. They could walk to Kingston. One guy told me once his grandfather dated a girl in Kingston. He would walk over there in the winter when the ferry stopped running, when the river froze, and he would see his girl and walk back. Sounds like a scary proposition, but he did it. So there's one more picture from our collection. This is a steamer, the Albany, that traveled up and down the river like the Hudson River Day Lines do today, that carried passengers from Albany down to the city and back. So once the train to Albany was constructed in the 1800s, the ferries were timed to meet the trains and take people from the Rhinecliff train station across the river to Kingston. And Benjamin F. Schultz's last command was the transport. He died in 1894. This boat, the Brinkerhoff, was built 5 years after his death. It was an improvement over the transport and is now in the Marine Museum at Mystic, Connecticut. It was one of the last ferries of that style and date and time, and I'm listing it here with the picture, and Benjamin had this picture of the Brinkerhoff docked at Rhinecliff, and it took pictures of it. And as I said, it met the trains to get you across. Now, the fifth person in line was Walter Luke Schultz, and there's a little mystery about him. He was also a riverboat captain. Here's a very handsome picture of him, taken obviously when he was a little older. He was captain of the boats and steamers and ships like the Reliance, the Peter Schultz. They named the ferries, I guess, after their grandfather or great-grandfather. There's not a lot of names in the Bible. There's, Luke and Peter and Paul, and so there are a lot of Schultzes named John, a lot of Schultzes named, and it's really hard. A lot of times they were middle initials that make it easier for you to identify. That's a B, and this guy's a J, and so it's a different Schultz. But it's not. It's a lot of people with the same name. And here's a picture of his pilot license from 1880 and his full captain license from 1888. These are in the album. And it says certified that Walter Luke Schultz is a pilot on the Hudson River, December 1880. And then 8 years later, he became a full-blown captain on the river. And here's his license, a master license, Walter F. Schultz, New York, and the lower bays of the Hudson River, Staten Island, and it's 1888 that he was granted the master's license. So he did not live in Rhinebeck. He lived on Charlton Street, where his son Benjamin F. Schultz II was born. Captain Benjamin F. Schultz II was born in 1859. There's a picture of the house. And, the general view of Charlton Street looking west from Hudson Street, these houses were typical of the area. in the lower Ninth Ward. It was west of 6th Avenue near the river. And that's when 14th Street was uptown, and a lot of pilots, captains lived there because it was close to the river. You have to remember that 8th, 9th, 10th, 11th Avenue were all landfill. I remember when they built the Twin Towers, I was down there watching the construction. They had to dig down 10 stories of landfill to hit bedrock to anchor the Twin Towers because there was so much landfill. Hudson Street was named because it was on the Hudson. That's 6th Avenue, Hudson Street. So they filled in a lot of land from 6th Avenue all the way to the river, and a lot of it's on landfill. So a lot of the captains lived down there. And here's a little mystery, which I talked to Mike. We can't quite figure this out about Walter Luke. It says here, a poem was written by Captain Walter Luke Schultz when he was a young boy, and a story of his life at Ellerslie. What does that mean? He was born in Benjamin Schultz's house next to the train station. I don't get that. It says he attended Morton School down the road on the Ellerslie property, and he went to sea at 14. So between 0 and 14, he had something to do with Ellerslie. He was a master of his own ship, went back to his boyhood days when his father's home, Captain Luke Schultz. That's wrong. His father was Walter Luke Schultz. His grandfather was Captain Luke Schultz. And Captain Luke Schultz, I thought maybe he hung around his grandfather's house, but according to the births and deaths, Luke Schultz died 10 years before he was born, so he couldn't have hung out at the house, which we believe we can't find. It's down somewhere around Ellerslie. A big mystery. And here's the poem. Here's the poem. Captain Legend of Ellerslie by Captain Walter Luke Schultz. The lofty point of Ellerslie looms like a ship at the sea. And he's writing this love story about Ellerslie. And so what happened between 0 and 14 when he went to sea? Did the Ellerslie kids go to Morton School and he was friends with them? Was he like a farmhand or a helper at the Ellerslie estate, which I believe at that time, 1833 to 1850, William Kelly would have been involved during that time. And so maybe he hung out with the Kelly kids who went to the Morton School. I don't know. I can't figure out this love poem, which we found in a Gazette, as well as being, it's just like 4 pages long, this poem that he wrote. And here's the Morton School down on the Ellerslie property from our archives. I don't know. It's a big mystery. The man who grew up next to the train station and his boyhood days at Ellerslie. So if anybody has any ideas or think about it, you could let me know.
Can I?
Sure.
I'm not sure if we're in the same area that I'm thinking of, so I'm just going to tell you there was a spot in the line where they said these boys, these were the children of one person, and I was suspicious that that person was not their actual father, that it was somebody else, and they were adopted after the actual father died.
Could be.
So I'd have to look and research it because, as you know, there are so many Schultzes.
I'm sure when a father died in those days,
It might be that.
when a father died in those days, the
It's
uncles,
interesting.
the family would pick up and take care of the kids. It was the way it was done. So, because there is something about, I don't have the whole, I was talking to Peggy LaBelle about this before, there is some information about Southlands and Grasmere down near Ellerslie, where there were Schultzes involved in the early days that owned part of the land that Tracy Dowes bought when he built Fox Hollow Farm. But I don't have information about that yet. So, this is the next guy. After Benjamin Schultz II, my father told me that his father, Captain Walter Luke Schultz, had a contract to tow the barges that carried the stone to the base of the Statue of Liberty in 1885. So they continue to be very important people. So Walter Luke Schultz is buried in Rhinebeck Cemetery, and just today Beverly Kane told me that the cemetery committee has just discovered Captain Luke Schultz's tombstone, which was buried at the Rhinebeck Cemetery. They've uncovered it, but it's too late to get me a picture of it. But they found him buried in the Rhinebeck Cemetery, his tombstone, just recently. So we continue to develop history as we discover more stuff. The sixth in the line was the author's father, Captain Benjamin F. Schultz II. Here's a picture of him, very dapper, around the age 30. He grew up in his father's house on Charlton Street, near Hudson, near the river, and he moved to his house on Jones Street, where our author, Benjamin Schultz, was born. Here's a picture of the house on Charlton Street. Just like the previous generations, he was a ship's captain. Here is his license. Pilots, masters of steam vessels, and that is Benjamin F. Schultz, and he was Benjamin Schultz II. And he was also a sea captain and a master. And in 1909, during the tricentennial, 300th anniversary of Henry Hudson's discovery of the river, they came from all over the world. There was a big celebration, and boats and ships all up and down the Hudson. I have 2 books that we had found, I think in the garbage or something. Again, some we're going to throw out. And there are 2 albums with all the pictures and all stories of what happened, all the parades and celebrations that took place. It's like 500 pages of books about the 1909 celebration. And so here's a picture. This picture, so the next picture was taken in 1910 during the Fulton History Celebration. It was taken on the bow of my father's boat, the C.C. Marshall. The boat was in the dock in Edgewater, New Jersey, facing towards New York. At that time, every country in the world sent a warship to participate. One of them can be seen in the picture, and they were anchored from the battery to Yonkers. And here's a picture of them on the boat, and it says, number 1 on the left is the deckhand, number 2 is Captain Benjamin Schultz II, number 3 is the 17-year-old, very handsome Benjamin F. Schultz III, our author, and Florence Edna Schultz, age 22, must have been a sister, and Emily Florence Schultz, the wife of Captain Benjamin Schultz. And here's a picture taken of his last command, the C.C. Marshall. Its length, 120 feet. Picture taken in 1910, coming to the dock in Edgewater. The Marshall ran from New London, Connecticut, all over New York Harbor, and north on the Hudson River, all the way to Albany. Now, Benjamin was the last captain in our story. The coming of the railroad in the second half of the 1800s began the long decline of river traffic. When bridge construction happened, and the Mid-Hudson Bridge was built in 1930, Rip Van Winkle Bridge in Catskill in 1935, and of course our bridge, the Kingston Rhinebeck Bridge in 1957, that cut off ferries and a lot of river traffic because trucks could get across the river, and it was easier to transport them than on the river. So we've moved pretty much away from Rhinebeck's history, so I thought that I would just talk a little bit about our author, Benjamin Schultz III. His son, Frank, spent his career in advertising in New York City. That was James's father. He spent 3 years in the Navy during World War II working for an admiral. And James, of course, I said, lives in Maryland. Let me scan his album. But we can finish here talking about Benjamin III. Here's our author. In 1914, before his marriage to Isabel, his beloved Belle, and he went to officers training school in 1916 in Plattsburgh, New York. The arrow shows where he is. There's no mention of him going to Europe in 1918, so I don't know if he made it over to the war in Europe. But he spent the 1930s and 40s a lot of time leading the St. Andrews Cadets in Westwood, New Jersey, had a marching band. Here's a picture of the band on Fifth Avenue. It's kind of dark. On Fifth Avenue during the St. Patrick's Day Parade. Benjamin's in there somewhere, but I couldn't tell you which one he is. And here's a picture of Ben as a commander of the cadets in Westwood, New Jersey in 1935. When the war broke out, after Pearl Harbor, he tried to join the Army, but they said, look, I was officer candidate in 1916, and they said, you're too old. We appreciate that, but we can't do it. Here's a picture from 1945 of our author. And he lived on Lafayette Avenue in Westwood, New Jersey, spent his entire career in New York City in finance and banking. And even though he spent his entire time in New Jersey, here he is in Rhinebeck Cemetery. He remembered his roots. Schultz, Benjamin, and Isabel, they're buried in the Rhinebeck Cemetery. So the 325 pages of the album are up on our website. And I thought I'd just give you a quick how to find them. Okay, so you go to RhinebeckHistoricalSociety.org. Long name, but easy to remember. And the first link, we have all the videos, and this video will be up in a week or so. I hope I'll have it edited in a day or two. All of our newsletters, and here's the archives. If you click on the archive link, up there is a search button. And if you click on the search button, you type Schultz family and hit enter. And when you do that, you get it starting with page James M. Schultz. Since we don't own it, we just scanned it. We don't have it as part of our collection. It doesn't have an RHS number. It's 000, and there's page 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. At 325 pages, it was too big. If I have small books, I put them into like 30 or 40 page PDFs and you could read the books. But 325 pages would have taken you 5 minutes to download and you wouldn't have waited that long. So you can just click next, next, next and read the pages of the album. If you click on 000, there's the index, which says Christianato, Peter, Luke, Benjamin, Walter Luke, Benjamin, and Benjamin F. the Fourth. So this amazing family in Rhinebeck were farmers, Revolutionary War soldiers, founders of the Reformed Church, captains of ships on the Hudson, and a very important family, history of Rhinebeck, New York, and the country. And I hope you've enjoyed this.
Yeah.
Thank you.